Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nikita Roy. I am the founder of Newsroom Robots Lab and the host of the Newsroom Robots podcast. And if all the robots references didn't give it away, I work in AI. And I help newsrooms adopt it, think about it, and build with it. And most often, actually, the question I don't get about is not about technology, it's about jobs. It's about what's happening to journalism's, and are we killing journalism's values with AI? Are we replacing journalists with AI? And a lot of questions from younger journalists about, is this a career that we'd even have a career in and potential in? And I actually want to start with a story that I have been thinking about quite often, which was a big reason for putting together this panel as well, was that back in 2023, just the rise of generative AI, I was at a university in the US talking about the ways in which newsrooms were using AI to help the students understand the potential of AI in journalism. And I was talking about how newsrooms were experimenting with headlines and having a Slack bot to help them with headlines. And I had a student raise her hand up, and she asked me the question, we just spent our entire lecture last week talking about and learning how to write headlines. And now you're telling me that newsrooms are using AI to do that. So what am I even learning, and why am I learning to do that? That's a question I've been thinking ever since about multiple different tasks that we're talking about and how we are using AI, and a fear that I think is there among a lot of journalists, a lot of early career journalists, about what are the jobs even going to look like? What skills do I even need if a lot of the tasks that I'm learning to do is using AI now? I don't think all of us have a complete answer to everything as AI is evolving so quickly, but I have 3 leaders in this space who are dealing with this question day to day, and I'm honored to have them with me today. So joining me is Jeremy Kaplan. He is the Director of Teaching and Learning at the City University of New York, the Graduate School of Journalism. And he also writes the Wonder Tools newsletter, where he talks about how AI can help you in your personal life. Joining me as well is Astrid Meyer. She is the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of DPA, which is Germany's largest newswire agency. And she also leads their AI strategy over there. And Georgie Podesky, who is the Associate Director of the JSK Fellowships and a lecturer at Stanford University. And so as you can see, 3 people from inside of the newsroom and from within the university space on how they're using and thinking about training the next generation of journalists. And that's a question I want us to have a real hard conversation on and get some answers about what does that look like, what does the future of our jobs look like, and how do we train our talent pipeline? So Jeremy, I'd like to actually start with you, the question I was asked about. What is the big change that you're seeing in how journalism is changing the talent pipeline, early career journalists? And is AI actually replacing a lot of those early career journalism tasks?
Thanks. First of all, it's such a pleasure to be here. It's such an amazing space that we're in and such an amazing conference. I think, we have to look outside of our field in some cases to understand what's really happening in the big picture. And I think, one area I've been thinking about is medicine. And if you go back a couple centuries ago, France was importing 40 million leeches. It was a very primitive kind of field, medicine was. Now we have 135 recognized specialties. We have pediatric interventional cardiology, neuro-ophthalmology, hand surgeons. We have all sorts of different specialization. And I think what technology does for journalism, as it does for other fields, is fracture what used to be a couple of kind of general areas of focus into dozens of very specific kinds of new responsibilities and new roles. So we have algorithm auditors, we have OSINT specialists, we have public records specialists, we have people who specialize in all sorts of different aspects of reporting, visual forensics as an example. So we have all sorts of new specializations. And just as medicine didn't survive the scientific revolution and the advent of imaging by having everyone remain generalists or by reducing the number of physicians and doctors. Actually, quite the opposite. We have a lot more specialization, a lot more focus, and the jobs continue to evolve in new ways to reflect the contemporary way that the field operates and the world works. So I think journalism is in the early stages, very early stages of a similar kind of transformation.
So an early stage of that transformation. Astrid, from your perspective inside the newsroom, what is like the single biggest change you're seeing in how you are developing talent?
Well, I think that was a very nice analogy, comparing it with medicine. And if we look at our own craft at journalism, I think we haven't evolved as much. And I think the biggest change right now is that when we, at DPA, when we look at how we train incoming people, it's become much more fluid. And I think it's more adaptive to what's happening out there. In the past, we taught everyone how to become a great journalist. What is news? How do you gather it? Or where do you get your sources? Why is it important to have two sources? How are you unbiased? And so on. And now, of course, we are integrating lots of things that you have just mentioned, like product management, AI. What is AI? Like really understanding what is an LLM? What does it do? What doesn't it do? And I think it's become much more adaptive, which is really good. And I think one big change that I'm seeing right now is that the divide between people that are really open to new technologies and people who really adapt to it quickly and know how to use it and use a lot of tools, also in this case AI, and the ones who don't, who are maybe afraid, maybe the ones who really resent it, people who think it's not for them, this divide is becoming bigger and bigger. And I am worried about that because I think that's not a good thing. We have to talk more about why AI can be useful in journalism as well, because otherwise we will have lots of people who will be left behind, and that's not a good thing.
And I often see that divide, and I would say, again, starting from the fear of just, we don't know how things are changing, where things are going. And Georgie, at Stanford, how are you training the next generation of journalists and helping them overcome that divide?
Well, I mean, thank you for the framing for this panel. This is really interesting. I mean, it's sort of like, you know, thinking about journalism educate. We're all journalists here, but Jeremy and I have a background, so we're not just teaching, right? So we're not, the challenge is really that we're not anymore teaching for the, you know, the craft that you used to be. We have to teach this sort of like a new mindset of working in, you know, in this new society that's basically, you know, algorithmically, you know, defined, like, or you can call it AI mediated, however you want to call it, but, you know, that's the sort of the challenge, to make sense of that new world, right, in all these roles. Yeah, Jeremy, your anecdote is a fabulous, right? So, but that's the kind of the new thing here, right? The second thing that we are seeing, we have an increasing loss of senior leadership, editorial leadership, right? So when I started in journalism, you know, most of my senior colleagues were there for me to help me, and now with the, you know, loss of jobs, like those roles are really kind of eliminated, and that's the kind of significant part of the shift, right? You don't have that. You know, there's a huge gap, and the third one is, again, connected with the sort of the AI umbrella that we're talking here, which is sort of most of the newsrooms are trying to figure out, like, what is that AI thing? Like, what kind of skills we need to teach, you know, train and have people, because like we're facing it. This is a relatively new phenomena that we're all facing, right? Like nobody really knows what's the next, you know, kind of what's behind the AI umbrella. So most of the newsrooms, you know, come to me and say, hey, do you have this sort of like a new, you know, AI young person who can understand the world, right? So I think those are like three kind of different elements of it. But, you know, overall, you know, my approach to this is really that, you know, I used to teach a lot of the tools before, like, you know, Google Excel and Google Sheets, you know, how to do it. But those were like, I would call them like deterministic software, right? Where you knew what you put in, what you get, 2 + 2 makes 4 always. But like with non-deterministic, you know, AI now, it's really messy. So you need to develop like more sort of like critical thinking than ever before. And I think that's the key skill that we all need to teach, which is sort of like the critical thinking mindset around AI.
I actually want to just double down on that a bit more, because what you're talking about is really important. We are having a loss of senior journalists.
Yeah.
And one thing that you know is that AI needs domain expertise. It's a generalist, and in order to help it be a specialist and to help you, you need domain expertise. AI doesn't have it, and actually so don't early career journalists, because they're just building up that expertise and that judgment, and they are at a loss of that. And so in journalism, schools have, I think, always been built around doing a lot of like the repetitive work, all of the low stakes work. You build up that expertise by continuing to do that and building up the judgment. So now, what is the new pedagogical model to help journalists build that expertise in journalism so that they can enter the workforce with it and build that critical thinking, because they're still new to it?
Well, you know, the framing, like AI intern of our panel, right? It's also a little bit even misleading if you think, you know, I mean, you know what I think about it, right? So the AI is really not a knowledge and expertise. So you're talking about, we're talking about probabilistic software, right? That can predict probably the best outcome of, but it's not a knowledge, right? Not an expertise. But it could be an effective tool for those that have expertise, right? So how do you balance that, right? And so what I do, I don't know, I cannot answer your question completely, but what I do in my classroom is like a lot of experiential learning, which means that, you know, we do test and do things in the classroom, a lot of experimental learning, right? So we do a lot of like audits of various AI models and test them for various use cases in journalism, like you were talking about headlines. You know, is it a good headline or not? Like, can actually whatever, you know, chatbot you're using, can it actually do the work that you need? And kind of assess that versus teaching you, okay, this is the way how we should do headlines. And we also need to be realistic. I mean, there's a lot of panels at this conference that talks about, you know, we need to stop teaching the old formats of journalism as well, because like the new formats are being emerged, and AI is an AI chat. You know, a lot of people are now even using AI to, you know, get themselves informed, right? So they're also becoming the medium, the way how we thought about traditional medium. So that's also transforming, right? Well, what we had with a news article, you know, when I was learning how to write a news article for the paper, and now you have to learn how do you adjust for a chatbot, right? So those are very different skills. So I think, you know, learning how to experiment, learning how to, you know, test and try and see where you get, it's kind of the way to go.
Jeremy,
yeah, I think AI in a way, like Georgia just said, is really like questioning our craft in so many ways, because in journalism from the beginning you are taught that everything you do has to be 100% right, and it has to be true, and it has to be factual, and that's a good thing. And I think that these are the things that will remain and that we will still be teaching, and I think that these kind of formats we won't change. But other than that, everything is uncertain, and you have to be an expert in order to really use AI and to be able to judge if that outcome is correct, or if you want to use it and how you can adapt it or not. And then the other big thing is writing. I think for a very long time, writing more or less defined our craft, and journalism was always so much more than just writing. But somehow, I don't know why, we built up this almost like a fetish around writing, and the best writers, they became then the leaders and the editors and so on, and CEOs. And that is going away. I still think that writing is a beautiful craft, and there will always be people who will be writers and who will write like long reports and things like that. But I think we have to stop defining ourselves as writers, because if writing is the only thing that journalism comes down to, then we are going to lose against AI, and we really have to focus on the things that AI doesn't do, you know. And I think that's also the source of anxiety. That's why people are really fearing to lose their job, because we are thinking too much about, oh, this thing can now write headlines. And as Georgie said, I think you have to judge if this is a headline that's good enough, or if you have to change it.
Can I just ask for the baseline then, to help us define what do we see as the identity of journalism? Because a lot of things people, I think, would say that they associate writing with being a journalist and that identity. So then what would you say is the baseline definition of journalism now?
Oh my God, you're throwing like existential question here. Like is this a philosophy class, Nikita?
We have
like,
to have
what
this
is
stuff.
journalism?
Yeah,
right?
because I think a lot of times we have to separate then, is it the writing part or is it a reporting? What are the aspects of journalism that we are equating to that skill now?
I think there's several things that are core to who we are as journalists and what we do, and acts of journalism, which I think of as like the 5 V's. We have values, right? The way we do our work and what we see as our role in society, which is informing the public. Our vision, like what are actually, the stories that are mattering to people right now, like the people who live in Perugia, like what matters to them in their lives. Like that's a human kind of vision thing about what actually matters. We have voice, like we tell stories in some cases, we create documentaries, we create these beautiful podcasts that have human emotion in them. And then we have verification. So there's lies coming at people every day en masse. There's huge volumes of material, not just lies, but just massive material, marketing material, etc. And so we verify and we kind of pull out what's actually important, what's actually real. And then the last of these 5 things is venturing. Like we venture out. We go to that, apartment somewhere, in the off-roads of Perugia where, someone's home is collapsing. We try to figure out like what are the problems that we can address or shine a light on. So I think it's ultimately about those things. It's about the values we have, the vision of what makes stories, the voice we have, the way we tell stories, the verification, and then venturing out and actually doing the hard work of gathering this information, some of which would not be information that an LLM can find, because it requires that human approach and that human relationship.
Yeah, and I think we still need to be storytellers. It's not only about writing, but we are human and we know best what kind of stories other humans like and that really relates to them. And I think one of the most surprising developments lately was that OpenAI just bought this podcast studio with those 2 guys. And why would OpenAI buy such a small venture, just 2 guys who are podcasting about AI? And I think that's telling a bigger story because they don't trust AI to be telling the same kind of compelling stories. And I think that's the core of journalism, and it's a whole process, as you just said. Like, where do I get my facts? How do I verify them? Are my sources trustworthy? And that will always remain. But this bigger thing, like telling human stories that we have been always doing around the fireplace, that's the thing that will, I think, remain for us humans.
I agree with that. I'll just add, I don't want to push back, but I agree with the notion that journalism is a form of storytelling. So we are storytellers, but in my head somewhere, it is a storytelling that is also a truth-telling, right? So it's not just like any storytelling. Telling the truth, and telling the truth to connect with communities, audiences, people around you, like you were talking about, your communities, and building that trust with your community. So whether you're a traditional journalist or a content creator, it is about that trust that you establish with those who are you reporting for, right? So I think that's never going to go away. I mean, we can talk more about the business side of journalism and how we're going to survive, and there are like more existential questions in your question, what is journalism, right? So I'm not going to open that up, but I honestly believe that this is sort of like a basic human need to have the, I'm going to use like an example, like even chimpanzees, like in a group, when a chimpanzee says like, hey, there are bananas over there, and they all go there and there are no bananas, that chimpanzee is in trouble, right? So the truth really matters, facts matter. And that's like what I believe that's going to stay with our profession. That's never going to go away. The best, still journalism is the best obtainable version of truth to me. right? But like that format, that the way how we tell that best obtainable version of truth, whether it's TikTok or through chatbot or whatever new form we're gonna see, like in 20 years that I don't even know now, like how we're gonna interact with those new mediums, still that truth telling through trust and connection will stay with journalism.
Maybe if I can add to that, I think that's true and that's correct, but at the same time I think it's not enough. If you think of people using AI a lot, they trust their chatbot and they create a relationship with the chatbot, and the chatbot always tells them what they want to hear, and I think it's really trust building very quickly, sometimes even much quicker than a human can build trust, because trust you build over time. And so I think we also, there will be some shifts, and I think something will happen to our craft, and we don't know yet what it's going to be, but we have to also be showing people more what we do, how we do it, and why that's really valuable for them, and why it's relevant for them. But I won't really bet my house that only we journalists are the ones who will build trust to the audience out there. I think that's already not happening. It's you can see that the AI is building lots of trust with people.
Oh, you're 100% right. I mean, I was not saying that we are the only one who know what trust is. So,
yeah.
But like that's the mission for journalism, to stay.
And actually, the latest Reuters Institute data that
Right.
they did a survey in the fall of 2025 showed that about 50% of people who saw a Google AI overview trusted the answer.
Yes.
That's more than trust in the US in news. And that's just showing, with just a few months of Google AI overview being rolled out, people having an increasing amount of trust. And so just coming into that point as well, it's not just about journalists being the only people, but we are also competing with how journalism is working and how it's changing in the information ecosystem it is. I just want us to bring us to the next point then, with all of these conversations we're having. And I take this very seriously the moment we ever talk about it's not just writing anymore, and an AI can write. That has been associated with the identity for so many journalists for so long. And for a lot of young journalists as well, getting into this career, they see that writing as a big part of it. And so I just want to direct this question to especially the journalism curriculum and how schools need to be thinking about this right now. What is it that you weren't teaching pre-AI that you are now really concentrating about in your curriculum? And are there things that need to be cut now as we evolve the curriculum?
I'll give you some specific examples. So I teach at the City University of New York. By the way, I'm very proud we're becoming the first public graduate school of journalism in the US to become completely free for students, which is really important for democratizing journalism, because it really should be a field that we can go into, not just if we're in the elites. And the reality is, at least in the US, it's been a very expensive kind of schooling to pursue, and it's not necessarily, as we all know, probably the highest paid field for many folks. So in terms of specifics, our curriculum changes almost every single semester, every single year. We're a very new school, so we have the luxury of not being weighed down too much by lots of old tradition. We're also a very practical school. So I'll give you specific examples of courses that we teach now that we didn't used to teach. Drone journalism. So using drones to capture photography in places where we couldn't otherwise go. Polluted water supplies where you need a drone to take an image. Investigating the algorithm. These are all specific titles of real courses. Investigating the algorithm. So looking at how algorithms are determining what people read, what people see, and how we're influenced by tech companies, for example. Safety. Journalists are under more threat around the world than they've been in quite a long time. Journalists have died in various parts of the world in greater numbers in recent years than they have in years past. And so we used to have a legal and ethics course, which many journalism schools have, of course, but we've now made that also a safety course, very practical training, because a lot of our journalists come from around the world and they travel back to cover difficult places around the world. And coding the news, which is not actually just about coding, it's actually about creating interactive applications. So the idea that news is just stories, we had a whole panel yesterday about that, it's much more than stories. The formats have changed as we've been talking about. So coding the news is about creating interactive versions of information and many, many others. There's a climate reporting lab specifically developing subject expertise around climate issues, which is a pressing area for our world right now. So there's a lot of different ways in which the curriculum is changing. And in terms of what we're not teaching, the specific courses, I have a great colleague who used to teach a course on Flash. He wrote a book on Flash. I don't know if people remember Flash, but it was like a leading technology for interaction online at one point. And we taught courses about Twitter and how to use Twitter effectively. And those kinds of specific tools, I think, are passing. And so it's more about these other kinds of macro skills and judgment. I want to come back to the writing point, but I'll maybe come back to that a little bit, because I do have strong feelings about that.
Okay, we'll get back to that. And Georgie,
you can write it to me.
Georgie, how are you dealing with it at Stanford?
Right. So I mean, our program at Stanford, it's not a school like CUNY is, and it's a small graduate program focused on really kind of the computational journalism, accountability journalism. And my colleagues there in the department, we're teaching a range of this sort of like computational methods through experience. And among others, my colleague Cheryl Phillips, she teaches really amazing class on using data and verifying like AI generated content, kind of fact checking AI for using it in a data set, right? So that's kind of the relatively new thing, but it's again all about that experience that we want to bring in, right? And I've been also teaching, before that I was teaching at Cronkite in Phoenix, Arizona State University, where the focus was much more, that school is kind of bigger and focuses more on the investigative accountability reporting. So what I've seen, those shifts are kind of like around the same lines that Jeremy was talking about, where we're removing the Twitter and those kind of Flash, not related, classes that we're adapting to new ones. But I personally feel strongly about, not teaching anymore the tools versus teaching concepts around these tools, right? So because even like you could think about tools as they've been launched yesterday, right? Like how do you teach something that's not being even deployed today? So the focus should shift on, teaching computational mindset and thinking around things like AI, right? Versus teaching, how to use, Notebook LM, for example, is a big part of my curriculum, and we use that in data analysis, document analysis. It's a great tool, but like in 5 years, there might be another version of that. So how do you assess the value is more important is, which button you need to click on right now, because that kind of really transformed, or what kind of line of code you need to write, because the coding seems to be becoming like obsolete in a way, because Claude can do this better than anyone here.
So teaching a lot more of the macro mental models,
the macro, like I said, the mindset, teaching more how to think about the world, how to think about algorithmic mindset, how to think about journalism, right? Some of the questions that you asked in this panel, like I have that in my class, right? And that wouldn't be, a typical way to think about, teaching journalism before as an authority, right? As somebody who has authority to tell you what journalism is versus somebody who's like facilitating the moment that we are right now and trying to understand and navigate this new space, because no one here, had that experience, because the experiences are being created as we talk.
Absolutely.
That's kind of challenging, right? So.
And I want to understand from your perspective, Astrid, as a newsroom manager, when you are having interns coming in, are there skill sets that you need them to be having now, as AI is coming more and more, and when you differentiate between writing and, I'd say, reporting, I think these are the two differences that I see right now, and you open up the can of worms of writing. What are the skill sets that you are looking for from interns?
I think it's less a set of skills, it's more like really a mindset. And as Georgie just said, I think for us it's very important from the beginning that we don't start with teaching tools, because they change, and now with AI, one tool can be obliterated in 2 months and then the next one arrives. But you really have to understand the mechanics behind it. What is an LLM? How does it work? It's a statistical math. If you don't understand that, then, in the beginning when people started using AI, the LLMs were hallucinating a lot, and so everyone was like, oh, this is so bad, we cannot use it and we will never use it. And now it's getting so good that people are using, oh, this is a truth machine, I can always use it, I can always rely on it. And that's what we are trying to teach, and people having this mindset that they're really open for it. So to give you just an example, we do an assessment center for 2 days. And people, one of the new things that they have to do is they have to do a video interview in the studio of DPA with me and talking about AI. And so you can really see what their thinking is. And of course, it's very stressful for them. I understand it's a real TV studio, but that also tells a lot how people are thinking about it, how they're approaching it. Are they critically thinking about it? And are they open to understanding what it is and what it's not and how it can be useful to them? And some other thing that we are looking for right now, and that's still a very old craft in journalism, is visual, is video. We have pivoted to video. Video first is our strategy, because as an agency, we strongly believe that in the future, we will still need people on the ground who will not only be reporting in text, but who will report or will take the original pictures and the videos, that we can trust that this event really happened and it's not AI generated. And so new people, we also send them in this assessment day on the street to shoot videos, to do a little story format, but not in text, but in vertical video.
I want to just build on that a bit more, because if we talk about writing, and again, a young journalist might not know what exactly a good lead looks like if they have just only studied about it in journalism school, don't have 10 years of experience of writing about something like that. How are you thinking about building that judgment at scale? If even AI is now going to take over the writing, how do they even assess what good is?
Yeah, and before there are misunderstandings, we still teach writing at
Yes.
DPA.
Of course.
It's very important.
Yeah.
And I think, for example, the classical thing at news agencies, and I think in a lot of newsrooms, is like you get the police report. And I think lots of newsrooms have automated this away, so you have a prompt and then it just rewrites the police report. So what we teach is still like, okay, this is the police report, maybe you are using AI, we have a prompt for that, that's the outcome. But let's see, if it's just a tree fell down on your street and the cat got killed, maybe that's good enough. But if there was a shooting and the police is involved, is that good enough for you? Is the police really an unbiased source? Would you have to call somebody else? Do you need to now send people to investigations? Who else are you calling up? These kind of things you still need to teach them. And if you, I think, only look at internships and at new people coming in a sort to save money, I think that's a huge threat, because then you are really going to automate everything away and you're going to cut your lifeline, because no new talent will have a chance to learn what journalism really is about.
And just to piggyback, we still teach narrative writing, right? So that's incredibly important. We're not going to go away, but the whole point, and I'm so glad to hear this from Astrid, that confirms the mindset is becoming way more important, right? So like people kind of being open-minded about all these shifts in journalism, right? So, but we still need to do the basic, the core of journalism, like the writing, right? Understanding what the story is, right? The other thing is that, and many instructors, lecturers will admit this, I'm not a, TikTok guy or all these new formats. I don't even understand how that works. And many of the younger journalists are kind of, born on those platforms and understand how that works. And, teaching them how to write a, lead in a AP style for a TikTok is very different, right, from what they need to do to, in order to serve, in order to kind of engage their audiences on platforms like that.
Yeah.
I guess I would take a little bit of a slightly different perspective, not to really disagree, but slightly different perspective, which is that I think if we take, again, historical view, macro view, crafts tend to move up the value chain as time goes along, right? That's the pattern we see throughout history in a lot of different fields, right? If you look at architecture, right? People used to do hand drawings, they used to do blueprints, elevations, like everything by hand, right? Now they use CAD, they use BIM, they use all sorts of other methodology. It doesn't mean that their jobs don't exist. It doesn't mean that they're not important, but their jobs are much different. It's not about the hand drawings, it's about the judgment. It's about understanding the client needs. It's about understanding the vision for this place, right? Pilots, they don't manually operate the controls even. They really do autopilot for the most part, right? They still have judgment. They still have to oversee the machine. They still have to, exercise that kind of judgment. Accountants don't do hand, ledgers. They provide tax guidance at a high level. All of these fields, photographers. I remember in high school doing photography, we actually did, I don't know if anyone in the room has had this experience, we used a darkroom. We literally mixed the chemicals, put the, pages in the different pools from one to the other. Like that's not what photographers do. That's not the art of photography. Again, this is my perspective. The art of photography is judgment. It's where am I going to stand in the room to take the picture that really captures this moment? What is the image that really reflects this beautiful space we're in? It's not, which chemical, and to me, writing is not actually the essence of what we do as journalists. Again, I recognize that might be controversial, or people might disagree with that. I think it's really about information gathering and information dissemination, and that may take a lot of different forms, but our role in that isn't necessarily writing. The writing, just like all these other examples, to me, is what can get, in some cases, automated. I'm talking mostly about routine writing.
Right.
I'm not talking about, the artistic kind of writing, which will still have value to people.
But going back to your point at the beginning, thinking about all these different roles that we're going to need, different roles will require different types of skills, right? So, there is going to be need for the writing skills still, it's to some extent, but there's going to be need for other things like you were talking about. So.
But I really also like, you have very good analogies. I like the pilot analogy, and just recently one of our colleagues, he's like our new AI and innovation editor, and he has built a new system where we scrape content from different sites, websites from parliament and from government agencies and these kind of things, press releases and everything, and then the whole system already tries to sort it out, like this is relevant, this has breaking news potential, this is maybe irrelevant, and this can wait. But in the end, you will be the pilot probably, and you will overlook that dashboard, and it's you who, as a journalist, who will judge which one really has the breaking news potential and which doesn't. And I think we all agree that we are moving into a world of infinite content with AI, but I think that real judgment will be finite, and that's what we really need to teach, and that's what we really need to be still teaching new journalists. And another thing that I'm also worried when it comes to judgment, I think what we are seeing right now, and not only in journalism, is that AI is making it harder for entry-level jobs, like people to enter the jobs. And I think in journalism, this bears really the risk that we will have even more power in senior leadership. And those often are, that's okay, but sometimes we need more new thoughts coming in, and I'm a little bit afraid if we really automate away the interns, senior leadership will even have more power at their hands, and I think that's not a good thing. And at DPA, we really try to bring in as many new and young people as we can from different backgrounds. And for example, during our traineeship, we really also try to understand what they need. So they tell us how we have to adapt the curriculum to their needs. And I think that would be really bad if we stop doing that.
I want us to just wrap up with understanding, bringing together everything that we're talking about. There's a change that I'm understanding from moving. Writing is not the sole identity with which we are associating journalism with. That's been a shift that is causing a lot of anxiety regarding jobs, especially for earlier career journalists. For each of you on this panel, what is the one specific skill set or tip that you would be giving journalists that would make them genuinely indispensable in the next couple of years? What are you looking for from your perspective, and what would you recommend? Jeremy?
I think, first of all, every student in our master's program has an internship every summer. So they spend 3 semesters in between the second and third. They all have an internship. We actually still see a lot of demand for interns. So, and it's partly because there's so much possibility now, right? There's so much need for curation, for new visual kinds of journalism, for new audio kinds of journalism, for new data analysis and data visualization. There's so many different things that newsrooms need, and they don't have as many senior people because there have been 10,000 layoffs in the last few years of journalists. So we still do see a high demand for interns. In terms of the skills, the couple things that we try to prepare our students to do when they're interning and then entering the field, a little bit unconventional kinds of skills. One is persuasion. Sometimes we talk about pitching. And you have to make the case in any newsroom now, particularly with limited resources, why your story matters, why you need a particular collaborator, why you need a particular tool or approach. You have to persuade people to, come along with your vision. That's a really important skill, and it's a challenging thing for people, especially younger people. Probing, right? This is about digging in, finding information, probing, how am I getting this result from AI, or how, as this, government report, how are they coming together with this information. In the hype panel the other day, it was really interesting, talking about how we often rely on the AI company's own benchmarks. This is how well the model is doing. We need to probe, and so our journalists, our interns need to be able to probe as well. And so these are the kinds of new skills. And then in terms of the AI, I do think that there have to be AI-specific skills because AI is just part of the workflow. People have to be able to direct an AI, right? Have to be able to, we call it prompting, but also directing the system, thinking about discerning between different models and which aspects of the models are using, deploying into the workflow that we already have. So how are we using some new video editing tool within our video system for production, and then defending against this fake information, right? The deep fakes and cheap fakes, and so those are all kinds of skills also that I think are the kinds of skills that people will need, not just next month, but next year and in 5 years. Mm-hmm. Those are the kinds of longer term skills, and it comes down to judgment, like Astrid was saying.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I wanted to point out it is connected with the hype thing that you talked about, which we didn't talk about up to this moment, and I think it's worth of acknowledging as well when it comes to actually teaching teaching journalism and especially teaching technology and AI this age. And this is so interesting. I'm sure even in this room that there will be those who will say, "Oh, AI is going to save journalism," and there will be those who will say, well, AI is going to kill journalism. So we live in this sort of very polarized world where people have lots of feelings about technology and for various reasons. And when you're teaching something like that, you need to acknowledge that space. There's a lot of implications of those feelings being pro or against, however. And as journalists, we're supposed to be somewhere in the balanced view. So I guess that's the, and so going back to your question, Nikita, what I would say, if I'm now in my 20s, kind of going back into journalism, I would really invest myself in sort of going into the direction of how do I develop my skills so I can question that AI technology, question the system, thinking about things, Astrid hinted this earlier, thinking about things that AI would not be able to do and cannot do. And this is one of those things is that AI is not going to question itself, right? So thinking about, more sort of accountability reporting around AI technologies and all of that. That's the kind of need that we're going to need more in next couple of years for sure. So if there's one thing, that would be sort of my expertise and specialization now in my, kind of if I was in 20s.
Before we move into questions with the audience, I want to actually end with your question to you, Astrid. We have probably a lot of newsroom managers also listening to this conversation. What would your recommendation be, starting after they go back from Perugia? How should they be developing their junior talent?
I think learning in journalism used to be by doing, and it now has to be by design. And you really have to think about it very deeply and really design learning into journalism, because otherwise it's going to go away and you are risking to losing talent. And I just wanted to say one thing to add what Georgia just said. I think in our craft, what's really important for the future is really to move faster. I just came back from China, and I was really shocked of how fast people are moving there. And the new buzzword there was OPC, the one-person company. So you only need one person who's good at vibe coding, and you can start a business that's going to be like a billion business. So my dream is that in journalism, we will also have people who move fast and they don't break things, they mend things. And so they can build their OPCs with factual journalism and build trust with the audience, and in a way still keep journalism relevant in this new AI world. And I think that would be super cool if people can do that.
So your recommendation is to start building your own OPC?
Yes.
Yes.
I want to add to that, the newsroom manager thing. I think it's really important to have people have learning goals. You know, we talk about KPIs and you're supposed to achieve certain metrics. Like I think like we continually have to learn. And what I've seen in the field is a reduction in the amount of professional development. Very few people in newsrooms that I know of have a regular training methodology, at least in the US, right? Some places are very different. But we have very little professional development relative to what we need, given how quickly things are changing. So I think managers should say, like, you need to set a goal to learn something specific, and they should have agency in what they're learning specifically. The other thing I think is we need more community. Like, if I'm a newsroom manager, I want to have chat and chew. I want to have show and tell. Like, people can teach each other within newsrooms, just like we're all learning from each other here. It shouldn't be just once a year. Like, newsrooms should have, and I've been to, we're fortunate to be next door to the New York Times. They have these periodic get-togethers, right, over pizza and beer, and just like sharing their, okay, here's what I'm working on, here's this product that we're working on, here's how we did this thing. And that kind of culture of like sharing and chat and chew and discussing and show and tell, like I think that needs to be part of our regular routine to a greater extent than it is in many newsrooms that I'm seeing.
Yeah, and so we need more community learning goals and more professional development as an industry to focus on that. We have just a few minutes for some audience questions, and I'd love to ask the audience. Ulrike, is there a mic? There should be a mic coming in.
Hi, I'm Ulrike Langer. I write a newsletter about AI case studies called News Machines. And about 2 months ago, I was thrilled by this controversy in the US about the Cleveland Plain Dealer, where a young reporter, fresh from a graduate journalism school, refused a job she could have had because it involved reporting but not writing. And apart from whether we think, was she right to take a principled stand, what would I do if I was that editor? Would I, by default, keep hiring from journalism schools, or would I look elsewhere to people who are already steeped in AI, ready to experiment from everything? Like, would it be easier to teach those people the core of journalism rather than journalists the AI mindset? And if that happens, what does that mean for journalism schools? How relevant will you be in the future?
Mm-hmm. Great question. I mean, actually in our program, we had a bunch of technologists coming into our graduate journalism program and kind of doing, the backwards thing, first tech and then journalism. So I think the notion is right, but it is an interesting question, right? So I mean, I would say that, having both skills on both ends, I'm trying to teach tech mindset to journalists, and from time to time I have an engineer who can even teach better the tech side than I can do. I mean, they can go together, right? And that person, I read the case, what you were referring to, I mean, should look for different kinds of opportunities, as Jeremy was hinting, there's going to be need for all kinds of skills, right? But this specific one, I think it's not a question yes or no, it's the both. We need to do both. And I know that, for example, Tarbell Fellowship, I don't know if you're familiar with those, they're embedding journalism fellows across newsrooms. More and more they're having actually people with tech background coming into the newsrooms and learning core concepts of journalism and contributing to the newsroom reporting in that way. So I don't think it's yes or no, left or right. It's more sort of like, how do we include all these opportunities?
Can I say very, very quickly?
Yeah.
There's room for a lot of different kinds of people.
Yeah.
They're craftspeople who used to make chairs, right, like a couple centuries ago, and they're still woodworkers. Like, you can still be a woodworking person. You can still be a writer who writes for a year, a great narrative piece, but they're also factories, right, where you're a manager, you're a leader, you're directing strategy for a chair-making company. So I think they're, if a student doesn't want to work in that kind of company, they can find someone else, and there's a place for both those kinds of people.
And I want to end with your thoughts, Astrid. If you were the editor and students are coming and saying, we don't want to work with DPA because AI is being used, how are you going to be thinking about that kind of conversation?
I'm not sure that at DPA you would say you are not allowed to write or you have to do this. I think it's better to make it a choice for people to decide by themselves, and then they can figure out what's working better for them. And I think that's also how we would have an argument around this. Yeah, and I think one aspect that we haven't touched upon on this panel, and I think that would be a separate panel, is how do you integrate AI into big old established newsrooms? I think it's two different planets, like teaching journalism to young people, and really getting buy-in from everyone in an old, very traditional newsroom, because you have lots of these kind of conversations, and I think you really need to be able to tell and show people how this technology is useful for them, and you need to make people feel confident about themselves, because right now there's so much anxiety, and really have very quick wins in workflows where people can try it out, don't force them, that's not what we would do, but really build a segue so people can try it out themselves and build up confidence and see how humans and machines can work together in journalism.
Absolutely. And I think with that, I'm really taking away the fact that we have to think about not just learning tools, but learning these new mental models of how AI is changing the way in just how information flows, how we work, and how journalism work is evolving. The question and the anxiety around the evolution of journalism when it's moving from not just us doing the writing to AI also being a partner in doing that writing. Where is the roles? And I think I'm leaving with a lot more questions, as any AI panel is, but I think this is a debate that we as an industry need to have openly. As you were saying, if somebody is having a different choice regarding AI, you give them the choice, have those debates, have those conversations, and this is a moment for our industry as we evolve to have those open conversations, people against and across the entire spectrum coming together so that we can evolve our understanding together and strengthen our industry. So thank you to my panelists for joining us, and thank you so much for your questions and participation.
Thank you, Nikita, for putting us together.